Come with me to a world where auto sales are stagnant, where EV sales are down while your government is requiring them to be all EV sales by 2035, where specific regions that have canceled their subsidies on EVs have seen more than a 25% drop in sales, where your international auto companies are struggling in China, affecting profitability, while the Chinese build factories around the world, increasing their spread into your markets, and where the only response is what for one of your major manufacturers to say, we're going to have to close 3 factories and lay off tens of thousands of workers. Is this some sort of dystopian future? No, it's Europe in 2024. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I am John, and I think that Europe has become kind of a canary in a coal mine for the auto industry. Europe as a whole was ahead of the US in terms of believing in and adopting EVs, moving towards an all-EV future, and adopting subsidies for them. The US lagged behind it, while we led in tariffs, and Europe has slowly come behind. Europe has struggled, and last year their sales across all of Europe was up about 0.9%. EV sales were down over 1%, about 1.3%, but specifically in Germany, they canceled their federal level subsidies for EVs, leading to an over 25% drop in EV registrations. Now, anti-EV people will say this has all just been boondoggle all along, right? That they're too expensive, they ruin the environment, we don't have the grid to support it, and they're just golf carts to begin with. None of that is true, but price is important, and where you're going to charge it is important. So if you don't have a garage, you don't have a single-family home, where are you going to charge it? It's a concern which politicians aren't addressing. And price is a concern, and EVs continue to be a little bit higher priced. Well, the Chinese are spreading around the world, and they are competing not only on price, but also on the quality of the product. And Europe has allowed more in, certainly, than the US has. And they're seeing the impact. Volkswagen responded by saying, with a changing economic environment, they're going to have to close 3 factories and lay off up to around 35,000 workers in the face of all this. Now, they reached an agreement with the union because their union is more cooperative than our unions here in the United States, and they agreed to keep them open, but the workers had to give up recognized wage increases for the next several years and potential bonuses. But importantly, Volkswagen held back the right to still lay off up to about 35,000 workers, depending on market conditions. I think that Europe is ahead of us. Much like if you've ever heard the phrase that California is where the rest of the US is going to be in 10 years, I think Europe is where America is going to be in maybe 2 years, something like that. They're facing market pressure from the Chinese, and it's not going terribly well. Now, it's not all bad news for the Europeans. If I understand correctly, Renault outsold Stellantis worldwide last year. That's a cool little picture, but you still see resistance to EVs. And the resistance to EVs in Europe is not because they're EVs. It's because of price and recharging. It's a different situation than what we have in America. But I think that the warning signs of what's going on in Europe still apply here to America. And I think that they are magnified for us. Maybe that's the best way to put it. See, Europe has started putting in tariffs as well, and America has already done it. The Chinese are still expanding. And there's a very specific little caveat here for the United States, which is Mexico. Chinese manufacturers are moving into Mexico, and that, because of NAFTA, gives them the ability to enter the United States tariff-free. But with the new Trump administration, with the tariffs he's talking about, if he tries to block Chinese EVs, specifically from Mexico, that really just shreds and tears up NAFTA. Now, I've never been a fan of NAFTA. I believe Ross Perot was right all along, but it does dramatically change the environment of Mexico, the United States, and Canada, and how we all work together by trying to single them out. The Chinese are going to respond at some point for Europe or for the United States, and that is going to lead to a trade war. The Chinese can cut us off from electronics that we desire in exchange for getting their cars here. And by cutting out their cars, what we're doing is interfering with capitalism. We're interfering with market forces. Right now, cars and trucks are getting more expensive, and there is a vast majority of us that want cheaper cars, even if they come from China. Yes, I know the security concerns. I'm not trying to address that right now. I'm just saying that if the Chinese could come here with a cheaper vehicle, by cutting them out, you're essentially cutting out the lower end of the spectrum. So as a buyer here in America, you've got the foreign manufacturers, Hyundai, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, building in the non-unionized South, and the unionized factories up north, much more expensive vehicles of full-size SUVs and full-size trucks, things like that. By cutting out the lower end of the market, it's going to raise the prices for everybody. By removing subsidies like Europe has done, and some parts of Europe have done, you're going to raise the overall price, because those people who are like, I'm going to buy a Tesla, but not without the subsidy, I'll buy something else. They're going to probably look at a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid, which is more expensive. It's going to drive up the price. That's going to negatively impact people who can't afford. They're looking for those cheaper options. This is not a future prediction channel, but I am going to make a prediction about a future. And that is that tariffs, trade wars are going to lead to a global recession. And I think we can watch Europe and see what happens in the next year or two and see how it's going to impact the US. I think anything that happens over there is going to be a major ripple, but if it impacts us here in the United States, it's going to be a global ripple. And I think that what we're seeing is manufacturers who, because governments have said you need to change to EVs, emission-free vehicles, by 2035, they've put out tens of billions, perhaps hundreds of billions of dollars to develop these EV platforms and found a modest uptake. I personally believe in a mixed fuel future. I'm not pro-EV, nor am I anti-EV. I believe in a mixed fuel where people have a choice. And part of that choice is they're caring about the environment. But EVs are more expensive. Plug-in hybrids are more expensive. Trucks are more expensive. And so if you end up in a world where everything becomes more expensive, the bottom part of that society can't buy anything unless they continue to buy it used. Tariffs are going to push the price up, and it's going to impact the buying ability of everybody else to buy new. Now, for 2025, the research I've read has said that Europe and America are going to have a small increase in sales. Perhaps here in America, we beat what we did back in 1999. But I think it's short-lived. I really do. I'm afraid to see what happens. Now, Europe is not being quite as isolationist as the United States in terms of their tariffs and keeping out the Chinese. So what we see there is going to be a smaller ripple than what we see here. But I'm afraid that the manufacturers based in the United States are not going to have necessarily the impetus to lower their prices, to keep things smaller. They're going to keep chasing higher, larger, more expensive vehicles without that influence from outside. And to me, the end result of that is plant closures and layoffs. because at some point the consumer's going to break. They're going to stop buying. And if all you're selling is trucks and SUVs that are $60,000, $80,000, $100,000, it is not sustainable. And from a pricing perspective, there is really only so far you can stretch financing a vehicle or lease deals before those customers are like, there's just nothing out here for us. You may notice I am wearing totally different clothing. That's because my recording software decided to stop recording audio at some point, and I missed the whole last minute of what I was going to say, but it gave me an opportunity to go back and rewatch this whole thing. And I want to stress here, I'm not a proponent of Chinese vehicles. But if you look at the European market and you see somewhat stagnant sales, a big drop where federal level subsidies for EVs are gone, where you see potential layoffs because of global pressures, and then you throw up some trade barriers in the process when manufacturers are saying that in 2025, probably the second half, they're going to have to start increasing rebates to keep the metal moving. We might see an uptick in sales, but all of these combined together raise the bottom. And there's pressure out there for cheaper cars. I know we all want to say nobody wants to buy small cars. Look at the Nissan Versa and the Mitsubishi Mirage and how they're selling or being canceled, but there is pressure out there for cheaper vehicles. Look at the initial success and demand for the Ford Maverick when it started at $19,995, or the Chevy Trax right now that's been the third best seller in Chevy's lineup since it was introduced. And these pressures are all going to push upwards. So where there was a future with hopefully less rebates of EV prices coming down after tens or hundreds of billions of dollars of investment and the subsidies drying up and keeping the Chinese, their innovation, their less expensive cars out, this is going to negatively impact everyone. I really believe that. So this is not meant to be a pro-Chinese or a pro-EV. It is, our leaders need to look at the big picture here. And part of that is keeping that mixed fuel environment. I've been talking about the whole video. Watching Europe, like I said, I think they're a little ahead of us. I think they're going to see the impacts sooner. And whether sales stay good, or whether they start dropping, whether there's massive layoffs, I think they are the canary in the coal mine for what we're going to see here in the United States. Thanks so much for being here, y'all.